we are blessed to speak with Sukeshine Gunateleki. Did I get that right?
Close
Suki?
enough.
Close enough. I tried my best. And this time you've written a third book in the series, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. It's called Like a Mighty Stream, and it covers stories of, just in a nutshell, women from the Reformation. Now, you've done other stories of women in the Reformation, and yet it needed a third book. Can you tell us, why is there so much good stuff in this time period, in this focus area of yours?
Well, I feel like most periods of history have great stories, but I like to focus on this period of history because I feel like there are so many relevant themes during this period that we can relate to today. I like writing about women because I'm a woman, and I feel like when you look at history, you see that history has traditionally been written by men, for men, and about men. And in the last few decades, there's been a lot more scholarship about women. And I feel like we need to be able to tell those stories because 50% of the population is female. And so I think it's really important to be able to tell women's stories and to tell them from a female perspective as well. So that's one of the main reasons why I like telling stories about women. And, just the themes during the Reformation: religious liberty, courage, commitment, conviction. All those things are relevant in our world today. So, yeah.
Tell us why you've chosen to do a more narrative form, a more storytelling. These books are very accessible. They're not sort of intellectual or academic, I should say, in terms of style. There's intellect behind them, but it's not an academic work. Why have you chosen to go narrative storytelling to tell these women's stories, rather than, it sounds like there's still holes in scholarship in those spaces that you could have gone in that direction, but you've chosen to go with stories?
Yeah. I think part of it is just me, because I like telling stories and that's my background. So whenever I read something or I see something, the first thing I see is, because my background's in theater. So I think, back in the day when I was in theater, if I read something like this, the first thing I think about is, how would this look on a stage? How would this look as a story? So that's just the way my brain works when I read something and I think, oh, this would make a really good story. So that just pops into my mind. But the other reason that I deliberately went in this direction is because I feel like people in general might be hesitant to read an academic book. People, it's not that nobody would read it, but not as many people would read it. I wanted to make these stories accessible. And I wanted to humanize these women, these people. Often when we look at history, we think about it in terms of facts and figures, and we're sort of removed from it emotionally. And I felt like it's really important to be able to bring back that emotional dimension, because when you emotionally invest in someone or something, you're better able to relate to them and then learn from them. And I think ultimately history, why do we access history? To learn from the past, right? And so I feel like the best way that we can learn from the past is to be able to access the past on a level that we can relate to as human beings. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much we can learn from history. I guess speaking on that, you've chosen to write about women who trace quite far back in history, but you're obviously speaking to women today, or I'm assuming most of the people who read this book are women. I don't actually know, but why is that? Do you see kind of parallels between the struggles that the women faced then and the struggles that women are facing today? And is there some kind of thing you want to encourage women of today to kind of step into or live up to?
I think two things. The first reason that I, focused on the Reformation is the history is great, but also one of my favorite books is Great Controversy. And in the introduction to the Great Controversy, because most of the Great Controversy deals with the history of the church, and the introduction to the Great Controversy, the author makes a really interesting point. She says, the reason that the reason that history is such a big, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, the reason that history is such a big part of this book is not just to recount it, but to learn from it for the future. And so I thought that's really important. There's so much we can learn from this period of time. And so a lot of it has to do with wanting to go back and learn from that period of time. Women, because I do feel like a lot of, clearly women in this day and age, we don't have to go through the same level of marginalization that those women went through. They couldn't go to university. They were just, in a lot of cases, they were just considered, they only had 3 roles to play: wife, mother, or daughter, maybe sister, but really it was just wife, mother, or daughter. And so we have a lot more options as women today, but I just still feel like we have a lot to learn from them in terms of their faith, their resilience, their courage, because we still face challenges, right, as women. And beyond just as women, I think just as people in general, we face challenges, we face struggles, we live in a world that's difficult. And so how do you face these obstacles as a person of faith? Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly I haven't read the 3rd book. I haven't had the time to get through it. But as a man, I read the first book and was very moved by the stories in there. Like, they are universal in, yes, it's good to see women championed and a woman author championing those women that haven't had their stories told. I guess that's what I've been hearing you say. They're not well known. They're not, their histories aren't sort of that spread, and yet I resonated with the faith that they demonstrated and the conviction, I think is the word for me. Like, their conviction shone through against persecution, against family members being killed or getting thrown in jail. Those sort of things were happening to some of these women, and yet they still stuck it out.
Yes.
Can you give us, without giving away, the whole plot of all the different stories, is there one that stood out to you from this book? I know parents aren't supposed to have favorite children, and your chapters, your characters might be, but is there a favorite woman or a favorite story that you got to tell as part of this project that perhaps has impacted your life or taught you something in some way that you can really relate to?
That's a good question. I think in terms of not so much, I don't know if I have like a favorite I enjoyed all of them, hey. But I really like the story of Marguerite Proust. She was the first female printer of the Reformation. And I thought that was just really cool because she was born into a master printer's family. Her dad was a printer and her brother was a printer. And as a woman, she had no way of inheriting that press or having a career or anything, but she loved it. And it turned out that her dad left her the printing press, not her, but she married a printer. But she had more experience than her husband. And so behind the scenes, she ran this press and she published. She's credited with publishing a lot of Protestant literature, even Anabaptist literature, which at that time was nuts. Everybody hated the Anabaptists. Like, even the Protestants, the Catholics, everybody hated the Anabaptists. But she published Anabaptist literature. And I love her story because she couldn't be a master printer in her own right because she was from Strasbourg, which was a free imperial city. And only citizens of Strasbourg could be part of the guilds, right? So you had to be part of the guild to be, to work in a craft. Women were not recognized as citizens. So she couldn't. But she found a way to, despite her restricted circumstances, she found a way to do what she loved. And I love that, I love that. She just, just overcame her circumstances. She found a way to do what she loved, and she found a way to make such a massive difference doing it. And I think for me, sometimes it's easy to look at our limitations. But I think Marguerite Proust reminds me that, like, just look there is a where there is a will, there's a way. She just looked beyond her limitations, and she ran that printing press, you know. She went through 3 husbands. 3 of her husbands died. But she was like, she kept that printing press running, and it changed people's lives. And so I think that's really inspiring to me, you know. Like, as a mother, sometimes wife and mom, and I homeschool my kids, and I've got all these responsibilities, and sometimes I'm like, I don't have time. But then I think I really want to do this, you know? And so people like Marguerite Proust remind me there's a way to do it. There's a way to be able to do things and make a difference in people's lives.
That's awesome. I'd love to know a little more, Suki, about, like, are there any other characters that have really challenged you in your day-to-day life? Like, after reading all these faithful, courageous women, how has it impacted your day-to-day life?
I think another one that I really like from the book is Elizabeth Cruciger. And she was gifted to a convent at the age of 5. And she was artistically gifted. Like, she was she was the first female hymn writer of the Reformation. And she would have, from the research, I draw a few conclusions. In convents and monasteries at the time, everything, was scheduled around the hours of prayer, the canonical hours of prayer. And the canonical hours of prayer were very musical because liturgy was a massive part of worship. So she would have been exposed to music from a very young age, because she was in this convent. And then to be able to use what she would have learned growing up, and then to take that into to then, when she ran away from the convent, she goes to Wittenberg, and Martin Luther confronts her and says to her, he realizes that she has this gift as a hymn writer. And so he says to her, you need to write a hymn for my hymnal. Because Martin Luther believed that hymns were as effective in spreading the gospel as sermons. For me, personally, how that affects me is I'm a writer. I tell stories. And sometimes you can think that storytelling is not as effective in spreading the gospel, or, it's not as effective as sharing a sermon. But when I think about Elizabeth Cruciger and, like, how the mindset that they had, during the Reformation, Luther's like, singing a hymn is on par with preaching a sermon. I'm like, there was a place for creative people in the Reformation, like 500 years ago. And those creative people were using their creative gifts to share the gospel. And so I love that, because I'm like, there's a place for people like me. And that really inspires me. Yeah.
So Adventist Book Center is the best place to get it. Suki, thank you so much for writing, for using your gifts and talents in this way. Thank you for joining us today and sharing some of those stories. And we pray that God uses the book in a mighty way to perhaps inspire people in their own faith journey, ultimately, as you summed up, to become more like Jesus through these projects. So thank you for your sharing today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.